Good morning. I'm the Chief Scientific Clinical Regulatory Officer for Medtronic, and I also sit on the Board of Governors for PCORI, and my comments reflect neither institution. Next slide, please. So I was asked to talk about the regulatory framework, and as you know, for devices, implantable invasive diagnostic devices are approved under a PMA or 510K pathway, PMA being more rigorous. The evidence must support safety in all classes and cases and efficacy in most cases. Clinical trials and data are generally assembled by the industry sponsor and completely owned by the industry sponsor. A summary of these results are presented to the regulatory sphere, the FDA or other agencies for evaluation. The data is published in the peer review sphere. In neither case does any of the targets receive the raw data. So we've lived in this world where industry generally has owned the process of developing the study, designing the study, keeping the data, summarizing the data themselves. Upon request, the FDA could get the raw data. They generally don't. They generally take for face value the results that we summarize. And that's very much the same in the peer-reviewed literature too. The principal investigators generally take the results from our statisticians and then decide to put the tables they want into publications and determine the discussion that they're going to drive. Next slide. So we've had an experience over the last 3 years with a product called Infuse, which is bone morphogenic protein, where we made the data publicly available. This was about 20 collected clinical studies. There was some controversy about the therapy. We gave the data to Yale about 3 years ago. They distributed to 2 systematic reviewers at the patient level data. 2 systematic reviews independently were performed and published in Annals of Internal Medicine. And then the data last year became publicly available. You can go to Yale's website and get access to any of the clinical trial data at the patient level data. So with that experience, there's some lingering questions. The question side, we want to understand who's asking the question and why. Are people interested in the truth or not the truth? What is the question? Does it serve the public, or is there perverse special interest? Should the query be limited to one question at a time? This is something that was a very interesting discussion we had with the Yale leadership. And should the methods be pre-specified? Access. Should there be an initial time zone of propriety, especially in academia? Most people who want to do studies don't want to hand their data over the moment that the data is collected. They like to have a little bit of time to be able to write the paper or write a secondary paper. And generally a time period of around 12 months has been floated in these kind of conversations. What level and proportion of data is requested? How deep do you want to go? There are many, many more details below the patient level data that are of interest. Should there be a time limit or license for data access? This is successfully done in Europe, especially the UK, where, for example, a national joint registry is distributed through one question at a time, and a time limit and license for a specific period of time. And who controls the data distribution? Clearly, we have to have a third party who's independent, but are there going to be specialties in this area? The methods need to be addressed. Are there a priori questions and hypotheses to be tested to avoid the inevitable multiplicity and data dredging that might occur? And what level of interest in data exploration is there? One, to ask for a data set to explore data is not in and of itself a perverse idea. But one has to, at the outset, say, I'm basically doing data dredging now, and we're going to come up with hypothesis-generating ideas, not necessarily results of the data. Next slide. On the analysis side, is the requester a competent analyzer? And this is a very important question. Now, the discussions range from, doesn't matter if they're competent, at the end of the day, it'll come out in the wash. I think there's going to be some turbulence where we need to understand, does an individual know how to take complicated data, multiple relational data aspects in the database, and understand how to basically arrange them and analyze them, and pay attention to things like type 1 error. Should the analytical methods be transparent to the public? What about secondary data sharing? If you get the license to get the data to do a question, can you share that data with somebody else? And dissemination of the results. Should there be controls on how the results are disseminated? Should it be unfettered? Should it be only after peer review? And should there be a full methodological review before it's done, especially when one takes the data and does their own methodology? And what kind of historical record should be followed so that there's a standard and people can understand this is the 46th question we asked about the database, not the first question, for example. For time constraints, why don't we just go to my last slide? One back. So I wrote an editorial in the Annals of Internal Medicine last year on the experience we had from an industry perspective about the Yale infused product that we sold. It was a very, very good experience. And I felt that there had to be 4 steps to adequate data sharing. We mainly talked just about the first step, which is sharing the data.
Can you do it quickly because your time is up?
Okay. There has to be a place for a public forum for people to be able to share their information, and there has to be adherence to the methodologies. We have to be able to understand what the standards methods are, but we have to have a forum to discuss the differences in results. Otherwise, it doesn't become a very meaningful exercise. And then finally, there has to be a willingness on all parties to be able to change their opinion and change their views once an adequate argument is being made. And I think the last 3 topics here have not really been formally worked out. Only the first one has, and I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Steve.